Hello, welcome to 30 Minutes. I'm Rick Anthony. My guest today, Ira Wolfe, refers to himself as a millennial in a baby boomer body. Dentist turned futurist, Ira is a popular TEDx speaker, author of 6 books, and now top 5 global thought leader on the future of work, human resources, and adaptability. Fascinated with the next phase of human evolution and capability, he accurately forecasts the current perfect labor storm we're experiencing 20 years ago. He is both captivated and terrified by the lightning fast speed of exponential change and the volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous nature of the world we live in. He is my friend and colleague. Welcome, Ira, to 30 Minutes.
Thanks very much, Rick.
It was hard getting some of those words out.
It's a mouthful.
I bit the inside of my mouth, and anyway, it's hard getting some of those words out. I really appreciate your coming down to being on the show. I think I've known you for over 20 years, and I remember when we first met, you were a purveyor of psychological tests for recruiting and hiring and so on. And over the years, you've evolved from that into what you are today, as I said, leading authority on work, the workplace, and the changes that are occurring, and the reasons for the changes. How did that evolution occur?
Well, at heart, I've always said that I probably had a content creation marketing company, and selling assessments to businesses, to HR leaders, employee testing. It's not the most exciting thing. So I really was putting in the context of why people would need it. So I started to do a lot of research. It was always a passion of mine of staying ahead, looking at future trends, studied the markets. Current environment 25 years ago was we were going to have labor shortages. What was wrong with this younger generation, the work ethic. And so that was the fun part. So I talked a lot about it, did a lot of research, wrote my first book, Perfect Labor Storm, about market trends and demographics. And then one thing led to the other. So I made my living, I paid my bills through the sale of the testing. But that was really a solution for a bigger problem. And speaking about the future was a lot more fun than speaking about psychological tests.
But back then then again, when I was in consulting, we were all talking about change. We were talking about changes in the workforce and forecasting what was likely to happen. How did you manage to get above the noise level so you were able to build your own practice?
I guess it's part of hard wiring about change. People always said, "Oh, you're such a risk taker," and I don't put myself out as a risk taker. I'm not a big gambler, but I take a lot of calculated risks in that. I also don't. I guess the old saying is, we don't like that we grew up learning. Don't let the grass grow under your feet, and I didn't like that. We were just chatting at lunch right before this of if I did anything differently, what would I have done? And there's a couple things that I can go back and if this gives any indication, I might have pursued a career in trauma, in emergency medicine, but more trauma medicine than that. And that certainly is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous at times. And I'm not sure I've ever lost that drive. So even now, as an older baby boomer, when most of my peers are, I sold my business last year, when are you going to retire? I'm starting another business and have all these ventures, like I've got another 30 years, left in me, and hopefully I do. But it's not a matter of slowing down. It's always looking at new opportunities. Because
you're constantly learning. When you stop learning, you're dead.
Learning and unlearning.
Good point.
So a lot of people are, how did you learn that when you went back to school? And sometimes it's not learning. We already know what we need to do it many times. And I talk a lot about this in change, and I teach a graduate course in organizational change. We talk about that sometimes is we know what to do, but we got to get out of our own way. So a lot of times it's not learning new things. It's unlearning the old bad behaviors that we keep doing things over and over again.
You are now devoted to change and understanding and helping other people understand change. Technology is certainly driving change. So how is today's technology-driven change different from what it was 20 years ago?
Well, in some respects, it's exactly the same, because if we went back 20 years ago, the internet was just coming into being. And if we went back 20 years before that, Early 1980s, I think I had my first computer.
Iris, I don't know how I've collected it, except that I collect stuff. But I still have old phones, old dictating machines.
Bag phone?
Yeah. I remember my first cell phone, or mobile phone, I guess we called it, was in two parts. One was the battery on a strap that was heavy, and then there was that huge, humongous phone.
Right. Yeah.
And it cost $2,000 used back then.
No, I remember those days, yeah. And well, then we had the brick. So we went from the bag to the brick.
Yeah.
And now we can stick them in our pocket.
Right.
But if we go back, if we go back just 20 years ago, we were talking about the change, how fast the world was changing. And we had just came out of the dot-com boom, and people said, see, that's not going to work. And behind the scenes, it was revolutionizing how we worked, how we played, how we got news. Streaming and teleconferencing was around back then, except we didn't have the technology to allow that to happen. But 20 years before that was the computer. We went from Pong, if you remember, for those old enough, we went Pong to more sophisticated games like that Atari came out and Nintendo, but then we had the Apple IIe's had come out, and that put really PCs in the hands of everybody, in the hands of children literally that grew up in a whole generation. And so we can keep going back, not necessarily in 20-year stages. What's happened is that the time span between these disruptive technologies, where it took a century or 2 centuries or even a millennium for something new to happen, is now happening in days. And just to give one indication of this, if I can remember some of the stats, I remember when Facebook came out, it started in 2004, but let's say 2008, 2009, they reached 100 million users in 11 months. And that was just this hockey stick up there. It took 38 years for 100 million people actually 50 million people to use electricity in the early 1900s. So we went from what it took to get 50 million people, 38 years, to 11 months to have 100 million people. When ChatGPT came out just 5 months ago, 100 million users in 5 days. So what's changed is not the technology. The technology is certainly much more sophisticated, scarier, but it's the life cycle of that technology. And for people that may not know what ChatGPT and some of these other things are, think about it, the phones. It used to be you bought a phone, a smartphone, and you kept it for a year or two, and then you anticipated the next version. And then everybody had to go out and get the next version. Well, all of a sudden, the new versions were coming out every 3 or 4 months.
Yes.
And it's like, well, I'll wait for a couple cycles. So you no longer went from, iPhone, I had my iPhone 5 for 2 years, so I'll go to iPhone 6. It's like, well, I'll wait till 11 comes out and 13. But meanwhile, there's a lot of changes that happened in that short period of time. And that exponential, that speed of change is continuing. And that's the scary part and the fascinating part.
Other than technology, which is certainly one of the driving forces that is resulting in changes in the workforce and the workplace, what are the other contributory factors? What else is happening in our culture, our society, that's driving the way people look at work, go to work, don't want to work?
It's a 30-minute show, right? So I didn't realize this was a documentary series. There's a tremendous amount, and part of it's impacted by the technology. And I think what's important is we were talking about this before. My book and now my podcast was Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization. But the Geeks and the Geezers part was really about the generations, and it really wasn't about age. It was the difference between people who were wired and tired.
Yes.
And I would, although I should be tired, I'm more wired, and then there's young people that are tired and they're not doing it. So it really was a little bit of a twist on what the generational differences and gaps were. But ultimately, we got to remember that let's go back to electricity or cars or televisions, that the technology evolved over 20 or 30 years. It was over a generation. And so different generations understood what the prior generation used, that technology, and even maybe 2 generations.
Right.
There's an entire generation, now there's 2 entire generations, that never grew up in a world without the internet.
Yeah.
They don't know the internet.
Yeah.
There's a meme video going on, and I used this a few years ago, so it's outdated, in fact. But they had 2 young guys with I don't know if it was a teacher or a mentor or a coach or whoever it was, and he had a rotary phone, and he said, "Can you make a call for me?"
Yeah.
And it was watching them figuring out how to make a phone call. And where's the buttons?
Yeah.
Where's the couldn't figure out, how do you make a call? One is because even our smartphones, for anybody who has young children or grandchildren, they know they don't call. They text.
Yes.
Or they Instagram you, or they message you, or you don't even understand the language that they're using when they're doing that, because it's all coded. But the reality is that people don't use a smartphone to call people. They use it to communicate with people. So
that's an interesting distinction.
So the young people really don't know the world. Excuse me, the allergies. You got the bite on your cheek, and I got the allergies. The young people have no reference point. They've never used some of the technology that we still say is normal. And it's not normal to them because it hasn't existed in years. It may be in your box of things, but they don't know what it is.
No, I don't remember how we use some of the things I still have.
Right, a fax machine. I mean, I remember when a fax machine came out and the retailers were giving it to you because you can fax your order in. And now a fax, I can still fax because you have to do that when you submit something to a government.
I still have fax.
Your government, but it's digital. I scan it on my phone.
No, I still have the big box.
Yeah.
But you must remember as well that there were in corporate America prohibitions against using fax machines because employees were using it to fax from the 3rd floor to the 4th floor instead of walking the document up a flight of stairs.
Or confidential information.
Yeah.
People were sending things in and faxing it in. And we talk about privacy laws now. It was whole other ballgame. But now it's like, those are the good old days of privacy concern.
Changes that we've been talking about in the workplace and the workforce, do they occur concurrently or does one drive the other?
Definitely a chicken or the egg scenario. Certainly let me take one step back. I mean, the environment certainly affects it.
Yes.
So a lot of these changes were gradual. We've been talking about this, prior to work from home, we were which is a new term. We were talking about telecommuting. Yes. Telecommuting was really first mentioned in the 1970s. It's not new, and then it gradually would pick up and they go, well, we're going to have double the number of telecommuters. Well, when you have 1% of people telecommuting in 1990 and early 2000s, doubling was 2%, which is where we were before the pandemic. And then you have an environmental disruption, a change. And then all of a sudden, 40% of the workers, of the workplaces could be remote. And companies are closing, getting rid of their commercial spaces and their real estate. So the environmental change accelerated what we've anticipated all along. And then you also add the speed, the accelerating speed of that technology on top of that. And then which means that we have an entire generation that only knows a world of working remote, working hybrid, not having to commute to the office, not having to own your own car to be able to share, to rent a car. So it's a little bit of both, that the environment certainly affected that.
Yeah.
The technology changed the way we worked and then changed what the workplace looked like. But at the same time, that was reshaping the attitudes of people. But that goes across the boards, is that actually younger workers want to have they want to socialize. We're social animals.
Yes.
They want to be able to have that opportunity to come to the office, but not just because our hours are 8 to 5. They want to come because there's a purpose when they come. And you can't put them in a cubicle and an office that the manager only sees them at the end of the year for a performance review or when something goes wrong. So it's changed, is the technology, the environment, and the people have all changed, which stimulated, the other. I think that would be tough to discern, but the pandemic, no question, ripped the Band-Aid off, just opened the floodgates of this change, and we're still in the midst of this revolution and evolution.
Do you see the possibility of a reversion to what it was before? People going back, whether they are required to or want to, going back into the offices, into the cubicles?
When I woke up this morning, I just read this really, really interesting article. And because I'm in the midst of this battle of what they call, WFH, got to remember when I say that, which is work from home, and RTO, which is return to the office. And we have these mandates and CEOs. And they said what's really interesting is everybody agrees on the outcome. There is no disagreement.
What is the outcome?
Is either a 3-2 or a 2-3. Is everybody says we're okay coming to the office 2 or 3 days a week.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
If we have the flexibility to work home the other 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
Okay, or vice versa, whatever it is. So the work from home crowd says we're okay coming to the office a day or 2 a week, maybe 3, if there's a purpose. I'm not just going to come in and sit on Zoom calls all day to talk to people who aren't in the office.
But when was the last time the workforce could dictate the terms of employment?
Well, that shifted. There's no question that shifted. But again, I think the pandemic took that off, because all of a sudden is you can go home and work for the next 2 weeks and then 2 months and then 6 months and then 2 years. Where before they said, no, you can't do that because we're going to lose our culture. You have to be here. Yes. We have to see what you're doing. Right. We don't trust you to get the work done, to be productive. Lots of reasons, some myth, some fact. But the fact is that it was okay to send everybody home and, hey, we're still in business. We're still okay.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden that didn't work.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not true. It did work. And here's another interesting, and I think this came from Gallup, so I want to give credit where credit's due. They do massive studies. They found that the hybrid workers were actually more productive, and I know there's lots of debate. Somebody's going to say there's another study that said differently. But they said that they were productive and happier and more engaged and more loyal.
But did that have a demographic aspect?
There were variations.
Younger rather than older workers?
Actually, older. It was across the board. I mean, it was a high percentage.
Okay.
Younger workers. I actually don't know. I don't remember that. But there is
your guess would be, at least my guess would be, that younger workers prefer the hybrid.
No.
More.
Well, younger workers prefer the hybrid.
Yeah.
But all ages prefer the hybrid. These people who got used to not commuting.
Yes.
I mean, commute, and especially today with higher gas prices, with higher child care.
Yeah.
I mean, if you commute, it's not only the hour and a half or 2 hours that you spend in the car, and then whatever the cost of transportation, whether you're riding, SEPTA or whether you're driving your vehicle. But then it's another hour or 2 of child care.
Yes.
Or caregiving or something. So it just adds additional costs to go into an office to sit on Zoom calls or on these phone calls. So part of it, if there's a reason to come to work, it's a change. So it depends on the type of work. It depends on the industry. It depends on the geography. People now, because if you also talk about what does that look like in a urban area with younger workers, they prefer going to the office because they share a 400 square foot studio apartment with 3 roommates.
So they want out.
They want out, yeah. And so if you look there versus the younger adults who live in the suburb or in rural America, it's different. But in general, what was really interesting about this study, and I just want to make, we can move on, is from a hybrid sense, the work from home, the return to the office crowd, they all want the same thing. But one's saying, I'm willing to give up 2 days at home to come to the office, and the other says, I'll give you 2 days to stay home. And it's like, we both need to win. It's sort of like politics. It's sort of like our debt ceiling deal. It's that there's got to be a takeaway for both. But the end game is that will be resolved, and it'll probably turn out to be hybrid work. But the other thing that was interesting about this Gallup study, it wasn't necessarily that hybrid workers were more engaged, more motivated, more productive. It's the managers who aren't. The managers are less engaged, less motivated, and want people to come back to the office because it's tough. It's very difficult for anybody who's ever done this, and I will admit it in myself. I have a classroom with 8 students, and some are working from home or they're traveling because they're adult students. It's very difficult to have some people in person and some people remote. So the managers are really struggling to be able to manage the workforce, and they're the ones who are not very happy with hybrid, but everybody else is. Leaders and employees are good.
Which is why you wrote the book.
It's right. I contributed 1 chapter.
Create great culture in a remote world.
I created 1 chapter to that, and that's what it's about. It's about how do you get people engaged, but ultimately managers and leaders, business owners, executives, need to become better at managing a hybrid workforce. And again, we can spend hours talking about the shift from Frederick Taylor's thinking and Henry Ford and Albert Sloan all the way up to today.
Let me read something to you. These are 2 paragraphs describing you. He is thrilled with the possibilities that arise from the intersection of novel ideas, human ingenuity, cutting-edge technology. Envisioning a world where everyone's quality of life is improved, education is advanced, poverty is eradicated, cancer is cured, our planet is protected, and so much more. However, the ever-increasing velocity of technological progress also fills him with dread, especially when considering the growing divide in knowledge, the shifting of power, and the widespread naivete among the masses. It's pretty heavy stuff. So on the one hand, you are optimistic, look forward to it. On the other hand, you say you dread it because of the potential downside of all of this change. How do you reconcile all of that and get comfortable with the turbulence that we are living in now and will probably continue for the foreseeable future?
Well, probably forever, because every generation, millennials have said that the next.
Well, I don't know. My one of my pet theories as a consultant was that individuals and organizations go through periods of integration and disintegration, and we are in a serious period of disintegration, which will be followed eventually by a period of integration.
And I guess from the positive entrepreneurial side, that disintegration, I find is disruption.
Yeah.
And disruption is a bad word for some people because the routines are, but it creates opportunities. So, looking at that, I mean, the terrifying part for me is not what the technology, the change, the acceleration can bring. It's that people don't want to admit how quickly things are changing, and they think they can pull it back, slow it down. I'm going to opt out of the human race and not participate. And unfortunately, AI uncontrolled. If we go to that, that's a whole Pandora's box. But if we go to AI of not the current versions, but that AI is controlling the AI is controlling the AI, and got 300 brilliant leaders saying it's a concern about us having, the human race going extinct. That is true, but part of it's because there's a whole group of people that don't want to admit that we need to a change right now, that we can control it, that we can create policies and laws later. But we know that's not true because look, social media.
Yes.
We're trying to put that toothpaste back in the tube, and that's just not going to happen. And already that's already nobody cares about social media because it's not the newest thing. And then it's the convergence of some of these. So
I'm not sure I agree with the last comment.
Which was?
Nobody cares about social media.
Well, they do care about it.
Well, until we talk about TikTok and the effects of social media.
But we still have people, I mean, and again, he's still influential, but it is when you bring in Mark Zuckerberg to talk about social media and Facebook, and you have our leaders still thinking about Facebook as a social networking tool.
I see.
It's well beyond that.
Yes.
And so we're still sort of stuck with it's this kids thing that college students do, but college students don't use Facebook anymore. Young people don't use Facebook. It's the adults that are using Facebook, and grandparents so they can see their grandkids. So it's just a very different thing. But TikTok's not dangerous because it's TikTok. I mean, you may have your viewpoints if it's a waste of time and how people are being influenced or how how young people get the news these days. But it's what's happening with the information. So, ultimately, and who controls that information and how are they using that information to control us?
Yes.
That's the danger.
That's the concern.
Yeah, that's the concern. And that's legit, but it doesn't seem that our leaders want to grasp the extent to which that is happening. Yeah. And then
the problem always is multiple agendas. Everyone has their own agenda on this, particularly if there's power and money involved.
Yeah, and just going back to the naive part, it's disconcerting, and I can't remember if I shared this when we met earlier today, but it's disconcerting when I hear people say, well, I'm too old, or, I'm just hanging in here another 12 years till I can get my pension. And that's when we talk about work ethic, and you talk about entitlement. And I can do this because I'm an older baby boomer, and I'm talking about a lot of my peers, is that there are just a lot of people who have been in the workforce and they've paid their dues, and some fairly and some unfairly, for 20 or 25 years. But they need to keep working so they can get that nest egg, which is due them. The challenge is it doesn't mean they can give up. It doesn't mean that they can just hang on and not learn or unlearn or change or adapt for the next 5 to 10 years, and then collect a pension for the next 30 years that is going to pay them more than what they put in. It's just not fair, and that's sort of the naive part, because if you have hundreds of millions of people that believe that,
we're in trouble.
And so the work ethic goes on both sides of that equation.
I know we all talk about work ethic, but it's a thing of the past, regrettably, at least as we understood it. What is the Googleization Nation community? I saw that in.
So let's segregate apart. I think people know what a community is. Googleization was the alliteration that I came up with for my book in 2008, Geeks, Geezers, and Googleization. And Geeks and Geezers.
I love that title.
Yeah, Geeks, Geezers was already taken by Warren Bennis, one of my favorite leadership thought leaders. So he wrote about Geeks and Geezers, and at that point it was about the old and the young. And one of these shower movements, we all have them. I heard somebody said something about ization, and it's like Googleization, and it's like, yeah, that's it. So, and it rhymed with Geeks and Geezers. So that became the title. But behind it, what it became was about the convergence of people, business, and technology. And that became the focus, and that's what I was talking about. And it wasn't just about talking about generations. It wasn't just talking about AI or technology. Yeah. It wasn't just talking about, but it was putting in the context of business. But just like you said before, which part triggers which, they all trigger one or the other. And it's more like an amoeba that keeps changing shape, and it depends on the day and the hour and the week. The community was just people who listened to our show, had similar mindsets, were either contributors, listeners, thought leaders.
Okay. It's your constituents.
Yeah.
I'm afraid we have to wrap it up, and haven't covered half of the questions I wanted to ask you. You do have a podcast, and you have a website. What's the podcast?
The podcast is Geek Skeezers Googleization. You can go to geekskeezersgoogleization.com. You can pick it up on YouTube. You can pick it up on if you listen, any of the popular podcasts. My website's pretty easy to find. It's irawolfe.com. Okay. Wolf with an E.
My guest today has been Ira Wolfe, who is a futurist when it comes to creating a vision of what the workforce is becoming and the workplace is becoming. And I think the operative word is still turbulence. It hasn't settled down to won't for a long time. Ira, thank you so much.
Thank you, Rick.
Always a pleasure. Until next time, this is 30 Minutes. I'm Rick Anthony. Take very good care of yourselves